Well, hello everybody. My name is Eric Lemus, and I am a professor of history and an interim chair of the Center for Humanities. And we welcome you all to this event. It's going to be really fantastic, as you can see. But those of you who come to these things frequently know that we do multiple rounds of introductions here. So I'm here to thank a whole bunch of people and then introduce the introducer, the person who made this event possible. So I would like to thank, I have a little bit of a list here, the College of Arts and Sciences for their support, as well as the Division of Research and Economic Development. We need to thank the Department of Gender and Women's Studies Affirming Multivocal Humanities Mellon Grant Committee for co-sponsoring, as well as the Jane Continent's Dow Professorship in Philosophy for co-sponsoring this event. We also want to thank the Multicultural Student Services Center for use of the Harsh Forum for Friday's workshop run by our speaker, as well as the Department of Art and Art History for donating supplies for that workshop tomorrow. Now, I want to very quickly introduce the person who made this event possible and who did all the work, James Hale, who is a professor in philosophy and has a joint appointment in English. And really quick, to talk about his two amazing books. He is the author of The Buck, the Black, and the Existential Hero, Refiguring the Black Male Literary Canon, 1850 to the Present, which was published in 2020 by Northwestern University Press, and his award-winning book that came out last year, The Dark Delight of Being Strange, Black Stories of Freedom. Sorry, I had it on my phone and then I start typing something else and it's a mess. I mean, I'm obviously a mess here, so forgive me. But anyway, The Dark Delight of Being Strange is the winner of the Hugh J. Silverman Book Prize by the Association for Philosophy and Literature, which is super awesome. And so, please give a hand to James Hale. Thank you.
Thank you, and I will definitely be brief because you all did not come to see me. So first, I just want to thank Nancey for coming all the way from Georgia. It's been a long flight experience, and I'm really happy to have her on campus, and you're going to hear a great talk and see some great works of art. So I'll be short, and so we can get started. Nancey B. Price is a Southern-born collage artist, storyteller, and cultural worker whose work uplifts the everyday lives and imaginative futures of Black rural communities. Raised in Girard, Georgia, her analog collage practice and fiction are rooted in Southern Black traditions, magical realism, and a deep connection to land and to ancestry. That's sort of what drew me to her work, and there's sort of a backstory about how I found Nancey's work, and we started communicating, and that led to this invitation. But it was her work on magical realism and a connection to land. Her artwork has been featured in Southern Cultures, Garden and Gun Magazine, Oprah Magazine, and Black Collagists, the book, and exhibited at institutions across the country, including the Maryland Institute of Arts, the Jepson Center, the Montgomery Museum of Fine Arts, the Averitt Center for Arts, and the Savannah Cultural Arts Center. In 2024, she created the cover art for the unboxing of A Black Girl by Angela Shanté, a powerful work longlisted for the National Book Award. Her short story, The Grounding, was published in the Black History issue of Motif Magazine, one that I helped to co-edit. So I was really happy to see that work coming out. Price is also the creator and host of Dreaming in Color with Nancey B. Price, a storytelling podcast dedicated to uplifting the tradition of dream telling in the Black community and examining the influence of dreams on our waking lives. Join me in welcoming Nancey to here.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Hill, for the lovely introduction, as well as thank all of you guys for coming to hear a little Black girl from Girard, Georgia, talk about storytelling and collage and all of the sweet things in between. So, like I mentioned earlier, my name is Nancey B. Price. I am a writer, collage artist, storyteller from Girard, Georgia. I am the daughter of Stefan and Mary, the granddaughter of Thelma and James and Willisy and Essie and Mariella and Willie and so many names I can go down the list. But all of these people conspired with each other so that I can be here talking to y'all today. And so I want to, not have too much of your time this afternoon, but to spend maybe the next 35, 45 minutes talking to you about a personal story that I've had with finding my place within the very vast cultural landscape of Black creativity, specifically Afrofuturism. Now, like I said, I am a storyteller, so I'm going to set the scene with y'all for a little bit. Now, I want you to imagine a hurricane that's out churning in the Gulf of Mexico in mid-September. Now, I know we're in Rhode Island. Y'all don't get too many hurricanes, but I feel like, did y'all get any piece of Hurricane Sandy back in 2012? Did that? Okay, so they're kind of like that, but less cold, I guess. So there's this hurricane that's out there churning, right? And at the time, this is in 2016, I am 22 years old and about a year out of undergrad. And I find myself currently just recently moved out of my parents' house and living by myself, enrolled in grad school at Georgia Southern University and working full time. Now, during this time, I'm at a desk job. It's a lot of computer staring and not much room for creativity. And so naturally, my hands start fidgeting a little bit. And I'm like, I want to do something with my hands. I wasn't quite sure what it was yet, but I just knew that my hands were pulling me in some sort of direction, some sort of creative direction. Now, at the time, I was living on my own and I had, my own car, my own living room, and all of this kind of stuff. And knowing that a hurricane was coming out, about to cross over the state of Georgia, I realized that what I didn't have was a generator. But I knew who did have one, and it was my mom. She still lives in Girard, Georgia, her and her husband. And they had a generator at their house. So I was like, you know what? Here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna cut off all the lights in this beautiful little one bedroom townhome that I got and hightail it to Girard. Now, uh, tell you a little bit about Girard. Girard is a small agricultural community. Um, very spacious to say the least. There's not much out there. There's fields, there's some pecan orchards, there's a liquor store and a post office, and about 10 minutes away there's like a big nuclear power plant. So a lot of the population in Girard comes to work at that power plant, but also help construct it because they just built two new reactors or two new towers and stuff like that. So a large swath of the population are construction workers, but there was also a large population that is in farming and in agriculture. And it's been that way for many generations. 9 times out of 10, it's probably going to be that way for future generations to come. And that is where you find me and my family. Both my mom's side of the family and my dad's side of the family can trace back their roots to Girard, all the way great grandparents, great great grandparents. You can go to the church cemeteries and point out who these people are in your lineage, and that's what I grew up doing. But I also grew up on a tractor and not just being in the land, but of it and helping cultivate it. It first started with me sitting on the side of the tractor with my dad while he drove, and then eventually, when my foot could touch the pedal, he had me driving the tractor and digging peanuts and cultivating the land similar to him, both me and my brother. Um, he said that y'all are my children, and y'all are going to learn the same these same skills that were taught to me. So, similarly with my mom, she grew up agricultural, rural. She kept a garden in her backyard, and I would be outside with her planting seeds and growing cotton, not cotton. Well, my dad grew cotton. He grows cotton and peanuts and corn. But my mom had a garden, and she also grew corn, watermelon, squash, okra, all of those good things. And that helped me get to a point where I could, have my own garden and everything like that. So I'm in this space. There's a hurricane coming. I need something to do with my hands, and I'm back home, right? And I decide that, okay, I'm in this safe space of Girard, Georgia. And on the day that the hurricane hit, thankfully it veered west a little bit, so we didn't get like a direct hit, but we still got a lot of wind and a lot of rain. And I find myself at my childhood home in my bedroom collaging. So thankfully the lights didn't go out. So I had on my lamp, I was playing some jazz music, and I was making art. I didn't know what I was making at the time, but I just knew I wanted to cut things out with my hands. So I started with flowers. And then I'm thumbing through magazines, and I come across this magazine that my great grandmother gave me. Well, it's not really a magazine, it's like a photography instructional booklet. And within that booklet was this picture of this black woman who was crying, and she was in mourning. And when I read the little description at the bottom, it mentioned that this was a black woman, I believe maybe either from Arkansas or Mississippi. And she was at her son's funeral. He had just died during the Vietnam War. So I'm reading this description and I'm looking at her pictures and her facial feature, and there's like, one single tear coming down her face, and like, her face is full, her lips are full. She looks very similar to the people, to the women that I grew up around, to the women who raised me, and, kind of looked like me a little bit to a degree. And I'm looking at her sadness and looking at her grief, thinking about the loss, thinking about the war, thinking about my connections to the Vietnam War, and my grandfather, who was actually sent to Vietnam and survived the war, thankfully, because I'm here now. But I'm looking at her face, and the first thing that I think about is, how can I soften this grief? How can I soften these tears that are coming down her face? There's no way that I could like physically go there and give her a hug, but visually, how can I add some sort of softness or care to her story? And from that, I created Blooming Grief, which is the very first collage that I made in 2016. Now, like most, 22-year-olds and stuff at the time, back in 2016, Snapchat was really big. Um, so I remember while I was working on this collage, I was just sharing my progress on Snapchat. And then eventually I shared my work on Instagram, and it was a instant hit. Instagram instant. No comparison, but pretty much like a lot of people gravitated toward my work, and I continue to share, I continue to make, and I continue to figure out ways to take people's stories, take images that I've seen, and repurpose them, and perhaps retell my own stories along with the stories that come from the images. So a lot of popular elements that I utilized at the time, as you can see, flowers are everywhere. There's also a lot of color. There's the use of space, which I'm a space nerd, so I always like using images from like Hubble Space Telescope and NASA and everything like that. And there are black people, especially black women. And at the time, my main goal was to create works of art that centered people who looked like me. And at the time, and you can probably do this now, if you open up Google and type in collage art, you're not seeing our bodies. You're not seeing our faces, our features, our emotions, our joys, our pains. And so I just wanted to make art that centered us and that centered me as a black woman, as a Southern black woman, to create work that reminded me of my grandmama, like mourning, for example. She reminds me of my grandma Corrine every time I look at that piece. And my grandma grew up about half a mile down the road from my childhood home. So I just wanted to make art that was colorful and that made me feel good. And early on in that journey that I have with collage art, I started getting a lot of people labeling the work as Afrofuturist. Now, at the time, I kind of understood what Afrofuturism meant. These are the visuals that I had in my mind about Afrofuturism. As you can see, there's colors, there's black people, something about the future, and black people in it. Octavia Butler always comes to mind with all of her work. I'm thinking of Sun Ra, Janelle Monáe, the Black Panther, Earth, Wind, and Fire, all of these like cultural references and visual representations of what I perceive Afrofuturism to be. but not just how I perceive it, but how it's fed to me. All of these images I found by just typing in Afrofuturism on Google. Now, for those of you who might not be fully aware of what Afrofuturism is, I have a definition. So this is from the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And according to them, they say that Afrofuturism expresses notions of Black identity, agency, and freedom through art, creative works, and activism that envisions liberated futures for Black life. So, in other words, think of it as like a cultural movement that blends the arts, sciences, technology, and activism in order to envision alternate realities for Black people. Or you just think about visual representation, cultural representation of Black people in the future. What does that look like? How does it feel? You know? So, there's this definition here. And I'm like, okay, people are saying my work is Afrofuturist. So I go back to the slide and I'm like, okay, well, my work is colorful. There's space. Space is everywhere. Stars is everywhere. But I was still sort of having a hard time connecting my work to Afrofuturism. And for years, I went back and forth and was thinking, okay, is it Afrofuturist? Is it not? Like I had this sort of like discomfort in my head about what it means for my work to be Afrofuturist, and I had a feeling that it went beyond just showing Black people among the stars and having my work just be like really colorful and imaginative. There was something that was missing in my mind to make that full connection between my work and the work that I do with the cultural movement of Afrofuturism. And one day, in my research, I'm looking about it, I'm thinking about it, and I noticed that something is missing in this connection, and it's this. I don't see my daddy's cornfield in Afrofuturism. I don't see rurality. I don't see wide open space. Now, I know all of this space is like, not what you think of when you think of space. I hear space and I'm thinking of the stars and Hubble. But like my experience with space is more rooted in wide openness, expanse, agriculture. But some of the other things that were missing too for me is my grandparents' front porch, soul food, my grandmama's quilts, being among agriculture, being in rural spaces. That's what was so hard for me to make that connection between Afrofuturism and my work, because in my work, I show people in multiple landscapes, but I also, make sure that there's like a, rural connection for me, because that's where, I came up. That's where I grew up, how I came to be. So I realized that Afrofuturism, or at least how it's being presented to the world and how it's been presented to me, is missing the South at its core. It's missing the rural landscape, the agriculture, and all of those things I know will exist in the future because they exist now. They exist with me. And they also existed in the past with my grandparents and their grandparents. And even though Black people have a storied history with the South, I fully believe that in every generation of Black people, they are envisioning themselves still down there. And as a result, I'm still down there, and there's still going to be people down there who look like me. So I'm trying to figure out why I can't see myself in Afrofuturism. Like, this isn't giving rurality, it's not giving Southern culture. But at the same time, like, we exist. So how do I make that connection? How do I make Afrofuturism fit within my identity as a Southern born Black creative woman? So I'm doing my research and I'm just like, people are saying my work is Afrofuturist, but like, what is there, why can't I continue to like accept that label for myself? So thankfully, I found a quote by Kevin Young, who is the former Andrew M. Mellon director for the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And he says, Afrofuturism tells us about how the past thought about the future and how African Americans dreamt of worlds they wished to occupy and soon brought into being. So with this quote, I'm like, okay. So the first thing that comes to mind for me is the civil rights movement and how that whole movement in essence is also Afrofuturist because you have these people that's the movement started in the South and very inspired by the culture work of farm activists back in the 20s and 30s. But all of these people fought for a better future for everybody in this country, and that's Afrofuturist. I'm thinking about agriculture and ancestral land connection, and how agriculture at its core is speculative. You're putting something in the ground and hoping it blooms in the future so that you can harvest it, cultivate it. Um, I'm thinking about my Black grandparents and how so many of us have stories of them who worked hard so that they could get their kids a better education, so they could have a better life for themselves that they had. And I'm also thinking about their grandchildren, like me, a Southern born Black creative who is, who wants to maintain roots in the South and think of more ways to put Southern Black creativity on display, put it at the forefront, and have people really thinking about the importance of the work that we do. So, with that, and thinking about like this quote and how it sort of helps me, fit Afrofuturism into my work a little more, I'm like, okay, so perhaps if I think about Southern Black creativity and Afrofuturism as agricultural or connections to like the land and farming. I sort of view it as like taking a seed from the past and then planting it and nurturing in the ground, cultivating it, and then speculating a future where the output of those seeds serve the collective benefit, basically. So I'm thinking, okay, for me, for example, I'm taking work that's inspired from the past and uh, retelling it currently for the work that I do now in the present, and perhaps somebody in the future will take my work and retell it and create more, build on the storytelling tradition that I've started, whether it's with the writing, with the collage art, etc. So, thankfully, I make this connection because then I'm like, okay, surely there's other forms, other ways that um, this connection is being made in different parts of pop culture, whether it's in film, music, visual art, etc. So, for the second half of this presentation, I'm going to go over 3 examples in which Black Southern creativity can be explored through this type of Afrofuturist lens that I have. So, um, first, I'm going to talk about the film side of it, which centers. What a movie. I think I heard that y'all had a screening for Centers on campus a few days ago. So some of y'all are probably aware or maybe even saw it in theaters when it first came out. It's back in theaters apparently now because it's Halloween. And I've already seen it twice and I'll probably go see it again because this movie was absolutely stunning. It was incredible. And essentially, it's a story about twin brothers who dare to come back home to the great state of Mississippi and create a safe space for Black people at its core. Now, of course, they are met with all kinds of resistance, but that's the root of the movie. And what I find so fascinating about Sinners in particular is that one, it's in the South, but two, it envisions the South in a very like mystical, surrealist way that I've never seen done before, especially in a period piece like this. Like Sinners is set in the in 30s, in 1930s Mississippi. So that's like the heart of Jim Crow and segregation. And so you have these brothers who are like, you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna start a juke joint. And we're gonna, have people come in and sing, dance, cook, and just be um, happy and joyful in each other's presence. Now, there is a particular scene that I want to point your attention to, which for those of you who've seen Centers, y'all know what I'm talking about, is the juke joint scene, the surrealist scene. For those of you who haven't seen it, I'm just going to play that little tidbit. It's about 5 minutes long. But I feel like this scene in particular really does sort of like hone in on what I envision Southern Blacks' creativity and its positioning within Afrofuturism can look like. So I have it up and I'm just going to put it on full screen. And it should play. I tested it out earlier. So here we go. Okay, how we turn this volume up? One second, I'm going to get the volume up. I think this is it. Okay, let me know if y'all can hear this good. Okay. All right. So this is later. This comes later. All right. So I remember the first time I saw that scene in theaters. And that was the first time I feel like somebody fully captured visually what it feels like to listen to Black music. The way that I consume hip hop is not that I'm not just listening to somebody rap. I'm listening to bebop. I'm listening to jazz. I'm listening to gospel. I'm listening to all of these influences that come together to create hip hop. Similar to the juke joint scene, how all of these African drum influences are coming together to create blues music, but also then blues is turning around and influencing electronic music, influencing dance, hip hop. It's like all of these timelines are juxtaposed against each other. Similar to a collage, really. You're creating a collage of music and of visual representation of what it is to experience music, but especially Black music. Now, of course, we know for those of you who see centers, conditions deteriorate very quickly after that scene. But for a brief moment, there is complete and utter freedom and joy that is existing within this little ragtag juke joint that the twin brothers put together in like a day's time. So when evaluating not just only that scene, but centers in general through the lens of Southern creativity and Afrofuturism, I'm thinking about, okay, what seeds did Ryan Coogler reach back to grab and the scene? And for him, Ryan Coogler, for those of you who don't know, has roots in Mississippi, actually. So I consider him a Southern Black creator, even though he spent most of his time in Oakland and in California. But I think that setting the scene for, hey, okay, when Delta Slim was telling them we brought blues from home. We brought this music with us from Africa. I think that was a seed that was planted that Sammy then turned around and cultivated with his own music, with his own song, for with the performance at the juke joint. But then you have him being like described as a griot and being able to tap into the past and the future. So you have all of these like timelines existing simultaneously in a Southern Black period piece, which I think is so cool and so exciting. And so beyond that scene, again, when I mentioned the idea of freedom and creating safe spaces for Black people to just be and exist, at that time there wasn't many, and even daring to imagine a place like that was, it could get you killed, and so I think that was a very Afrofuturist act to even dare to dream about a place of freedom and safety for Black folks. And even though it wasn't fully achieved by the end of the film, I think there are some lessons that can be learned that future filmmakers and creators can carry with them into the future, especially when it comes to showing the South on film. And so, yeah, I think, Sinners is one of the more recent examples, but there are so many others that exist in film where that same sort of idea can be true. Now, transitioning to music a little bit, Cowboy Carter. Full disclosure, I am in the Beehive. I am a very big Beyonce fan. I've seen her. I can't tell you how many times I've seen her in concert. But I want to specifically talk about Cowboy Carter, both the album and the tour that she just wrapped up this summer. Cowboy Carter was spawned out of a very negative experience that Beyonce had at the CMA Awards a couple years ago. Well, not even a couple. I guess it's been almost 10 years now at this point. Um, but Cowboy Carter, in this album, Beyonce is reaching back in time and exploring the Black Southern creative country roots of country music and then reimagining it, repurposing it for a modern day audience. And she does that with Cowboy Carter. Now, Beyonce, for all intents and purposes, is a free Black woman, and she's free to make music, art, direct, write, make documentaries, everything like that. And even though she also had a pretty negative experience, she took that experience and created something really beautiful from it. Which I also need to say that Beyonce is from Texas and has roots in both Louisiana and Alabama. So people who want to call her, want to say she's not country, that's not completely accurate. Um, but there's another video that I want to show you guys, and this is a Beyonce Cowboy Carter tour scene. Hate to admit that I was not able to see Cowboy Carter this time around, and I'm still a little hurt from that. But I have been experiencing it on YouTube, and it's been very nice to watch. So I'm going to play this scene, and then I'll come back and talk about it. Okay, so hopefully the microphone wasn't picking up on me singing along with Beyonce. Okay, let me find this. So, a couple of things about that song in particular, and why I chose this presentation, why I chose this video for the presentation. One, Beyonce is doing quite a few callbacks in this performance in particular. One, she is sampling "Look Yonder" by Leadbelly, who was a black folk artist. Back in like the 20s and 30s. One of his more popular songs is Black Betty, which I think Ramjack is the name of the rock group that did the cover. So, you know, oh, Black Betty, Bama Lamb, like that's a black song. And so she is using Leadbelly to open the performance. She's incorporating call and response in that performance, which is essentially African. She's also using her body as an instrument. The way she hits her cowboy boot on that ground really hard. Which I'm thinking about like when black folks were enslaved on a plantation and how oftentimes they would take away our instruments because for a lot of African tribes they would use drums as a way to communicate with each other. So they took our drums away. And so what did we have to make noise with? We had our bodies, we had our feet, we had our hands, hand clapping and everything. We had our voices, and that's oftentimes what we would use to make music when our instruments were taken away. So I like pointing out those little things in Beyonce's performance, but one of the things that I think that Beyonce does a really good job with is always reaching back in time and bringing the roots of whatever genre that she's singing in. She's highlighting the roots of that genre and censoring it, and then making it her own. And so for Cowboy Carter, it's the black Southern country roots that inspired this album and what she seeks to highlight. But then she's also sort of like reaching into the future a little bit by introducing more current country artists like the Shaboozys and Tanner Adele's and Brittany Howard's. It's like she's trying to push the genre forward and remind people of the origins all at the same time. Um, so thinking about it again in terms of like the Southern Black creative Afrofuturist lens, the seed, perhaps, for example, with the performance, the seed is Lead Belly, but the seed could also be Linda Martell or Elizabeth Cotton or so many other Black country musicians, and then the cultivation could be Cowboy Carter and the creation of that, and then the speculation, the pushing into the future could be her platforming all of these newer country artists who've probably been singing country forever, but just never had that mass appeal or that platform to be introduced into a wide audience. So, me, I'm not a singer or a filmmaker. I don't have any videos to share with y'all. I just have my art and my words. But um, when I think about the work that I do and how I seek to push um, my profession forward, I always go back to this part of my statement where I say I create works that envision worlds where Black people exist freely in all of their beauty and all of their complexity, and both within the land, above the stars, everywhere in between. Now, it took a while for me to realize, I don't know why, because I mean, it seems so like matter of fact now, but this quote, this statement is inherently Afrofuturist because Black people existing freely anywhere is revolutionary in and of itself. And it's something that, we try to create spaces like that in the present, but it's always something we're trying to envision for the future. So, here are a few pieces that I'd like to share with y'all of some of my collage art, my writing, and even with some like creative safe spaces that I'm cultivating here. So, with my collage art, I love referencing archival imagery and then juxtaposing it against more current modern day images or just against some kind of color. For example, on the upper, what is my left and right? Upper left, that is Celestial Harvest. That's one of my babies, and I have a very special story with that one. Which, if you want me to talk about it, then we can do that in Q&A. But with Celestial Harvest, I wanted to explore the magic and beauty of being a Black farmer's daughter and how it looks and feels to experience ancestral land cultivation. When I'm out on the farm and in the field, it's not just me out there. It always feels like my grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins and family friends and everybody's out there with me when I'm cultivating the land. But also, thinking about the the mystical nature of it too. It's like, yeah, we could be growing peanuts, but we could also be growing planets. We could be picking plums or also picking stars. And so I let my imagination run wild with that one. But there's other images on here like things we carried on the upper right. hand side, the one with the water. I swear I was going to get my right and left together. But with that piece, I'm thinking about the transatlantic slave trade and thinking about the things that we carried with us in addition to our bodies when we came ashore in the United States. So it wasn't just our bodies that came with us, it was our resistance, our resilience, our ability to cultivate land, to, you know, pray, to be spiritual, to be creative. All of those things came with us when we came across that water, you know. Um, Another collage that's really special to me is down there on the bottom left. That is my great auntie. Her name was Maribel Reddick, and for all intents and purposes, she was another grandmother to us as well. This was the first collage where I included an ancestral family photo that I had, and it was just um, you know, Maybelle just being cute in a fur coat that wasn't hers. Um, I think the family story is they went to a photo studio and they had like all of these things that people could like dress up in and everything like that. And so they found this fur coat and Maybelle was like, I want to put this fur coat on and look cute. And so she did. And so I wanted to create a piece that sort of commemorated her. I haven't made any other family pieces since this one, but like I'm always inspired to figure out ways in which I can incorporate more familial images into my work. But generally speaking, I like to use just like Black archival images. Most of them I get from places like Wikimedia Commons. They have a beautiful collection, but also some of the museums and everything and libraries will have a good collection of archival imageries as well. Um, Thinking about my writing, especially my short stories, the grounding comes to mind for me as a story about it's a reimagining of the People Could Fly, which is a very there's so many different versions of that story, but it's essentially about Black people flying away and resisting like this like cultural landscape that we find ourselves in. And so with my short stories, I like to touch on like cultural stories as well as familial stories that I have. So the main character, for example, is inspired by my granddaddy Fox, who is my mother's father, and he was a moonshine man, and he could tell you some stories for days. But with him being a moonshine man, he also partook in a lot of moonshine. So there's there's slurred speech, but there's also a lot of love and a lot of truth to the words that he says. And so I like to take both cultural stories and familial stories and create new stories of my own. And then, of course, one of the um, final pieces to the puzzle of culture work that I do, because it seems like I'm just doing so much now. But I like to create safe spaces. So um, I do collage workshops, which I'll go into more detail about that later. But in all of my workshops, I like to create safe spaces where people can tell their own stories using archival imagery or images that they just find that they connect with. But I also um, do create safe spaces through my podcast, Dreaming in Color with Nancey B. And so growing up, I am always hearing stories about dreams that my mama had. And she's sort of like the dream teller in the family, but there's a lot of women in my family line that tell dreams that are prophetic, dreams that seem to make no sense, but then once something happens, it's like, oh, I had a dream about that. And so growing up in a family of dreamers and me being a dreamer myself, I created that podcast because I wanted to know if there was any other Black folks who had similar experiences with dreams. If anybody else dreamt about fish and then started calling their cousins to see who was pregnant, or if someone was dreaming about a funeral and they wanted to find out who was getting married. So I have this podcast, and with each episode, I sit down and create a safe space for Black dreamers to just tell the dream story, and then we just talk about it. There may be interpretation, or there may just be, hey, you remember I had, so I had this dream about this elevator, and this is what it taught me about going with the flow, you know. So with all of the things that I do, I'm starting to realize it. It took some time for me to get to a point where I could see the Afrofuturism in my work. I could see the futures, I could see the Southern representation, the callback to the past and how the past is influencing my current work as well as the future work. And so that's the example that I have as far as like, okay, this is where I feel like I kind of fit in the landscape of Afrofuturism. It took a minute, and I had to look at quite a few different like videos and pop culture references, but we got here, you know. So there's a few things that both my work, Beyonce's work, and Ryan Coogler's work have in common. There's like this existence of like a timeline that includes the past, the present, and the future. So in the joint, for example, you got the African drummers, you got blues, you got hip hop and psychedelic funk music, and all of these things that are existing in this free space, this free safe space for Black people. With Beyonce, she has Lead Belly and Linda Martell, and all of these other people existing within her work as a musician. But there's also identity that comes into play here. And all of the pieces and all of the examples that I have, including my own example, I'm placing who I am, where I'm from, and the people that I'm from at the center. At the beginning of my presentation, I say who my people are. At the beginning of Sammy Moore's presentation, Sammy saying, I'm Sammy Moore from from Sunflower Plantation, and my daddy's a preacher, la la la. So it's like setting ourselves within the space and centering our identity um, is important to the puzzle. But also, all of us are from the South, and all of these connections that we have and the ways that we explore our creative side, they're all like very Southern and very Southern, very Black, and just very Afrofuturistic. And so now moving forward, I when someone says that, oh, hey Nancy, your work is Afrofuturist, I'm like, yeah, it is, but it's not Afrofuturist in the ways that you think with just technology and science and space, but it's also Afrofuturist in the way that I identify, the way that I show up with my culture, the way that my creative works exist on multiple timelines. So, moving forward and thinking of what is to come for the future and everything, um, I suspect that more movies and music like Cowboy Carter and Sinners will come to fruition despite, external um, actors pushing against that. I think that more identity focused media will continue to persist. It may just come in different avenues that we may not be used to yet, or in avenues that just haven't been thought about yet. Um, but thinking about the South in particular and how, for a large chunk of the Black population here in the United States, the South is the root of our American experience. And so, in thinking about our futures, the South has to be present in that. So, I would encourage all of you as you're thinking about the future, Afrofuturism, etc., like make sure that the South is in there too, because South got something to say. We always have. Now, with that in mind, thinking about your own futures, if y'all ain't doing that in the immediate future, tomorrow, I'm hosting a community collage workshop. And I invite you to come and just imagine what your own future can look like through this Southern agricultural creative lens that I've used to create my own artwork with. So, with that said, that's the end of my presentation, y'all. So, a few things. If you want to email me, I got my email. I'm also on Instagram and TikTok. I have a website, so you can scan that QR code to access my link tree and all of the things. I'd like to do a land acknowledgement statement and acknowledge the Narragansett, the Wampanoag, Nip, the Nipmuc, and the Neantic tribes whose land we currently occupy. I'd also like to thank the Girard Center for Humanities, the Department of Gender and Women's Studies, which that was my major in college, so I'm really excited about that. As well as, ooh, I hit the microphone, as well as Dr. Hale and his professorship and his invitation for me coming here. So, with that said, I'm all done. Open for questions. Gotta hit the button.
All right, yeah, we do have time for questions. Yep.
My name is Iris. But
Mm.
about I talk loud. We came in and we have a class that we're going to continue to go to, so don't think we all left
Uh-huh.
or anything. We got a nice little head down from our class, so we really enjoyed everything.
Thank you.
But I did want to ask a question before I need to run. I'm thinking about the way that scene comes together because as soon as you said centerist, that scene was the first thing that came to my mind.
Right.
No matter how many times I watch it, I want to cry. I
Mm-hmm.
feel every aspect of it. I feel the way the future and the past come together. I feel that in music and everything that I see in my everyday life. So I think about the creation of that, and I think about the creation of your work, and just like the scene and the starting point, and what for you is that scene when you put this collage together.
Mm-hmm.
Do I start with the archive? Do I start with the setting? Is there no method to it? Is it just this pulls me and I want to place this all together? So I'm just curious about what is your scene?
Yeah.
Each of your pieces.
That's a beautiful question. My seed is the muse. So when I'm going through and looking through the archives or magazines or photo books or whatever, I'm looking for that person who's going to be the centerpiece. And that person is always black, and 9 times out of 10, it's a woman. And so I start there, and then I build the world around her. So she is my seed, and then I sort of go from there. Thank you.
Mike's working now, so turns out you have to turn it on.
No, I'm not good at hearing, so I'm gonna need you to grab the mic.
Thank you. Kind of like to piggyback off of that question. Is there like a certain amount of like connection that you feel like you need to have to the person that you're making your muse, or is it kind of like I see it and I really enjoy this person's face or their vibe or their aura or something like that, or is it like you feel like you need to like have some type of connection, whether that's like a familial connection, how you were talking about with, I think you said it was a great grandmother or. And
My great aunt Mabel.
yeah,
Yeah.
like, or is it like something that's like I feel like I connect with your story, or what your story is kind of giving me with this picture
Yeah.
that I'm seeing of you.
It's kind of a mixture of both. I feel like, well, mainly, I just kind of go off the energy of the photo. Sometimes the picture will have a description, other times it might not. I think it's interesting that my very first collage with Blooming Grief, it had a full description of this woman, why she was crying, what was going on around her, and everything. But oftentimes I'm just sort of like finding the images, and if I connect with them, like on a personal level, or I'm like, ooh, because sometimes I'll just make art and I'm like, this person will look really good sitting on top of a waterfall. There is no reason. I just want to put them there. But then sometimes the reason comes after the piece is finished. So I may create this collage, and then it's almost as if like the story comes to me after I've created it. And which I think for me it's a very spiritual experience, because it's almost as if like I'm a conduit to some external force that's trying to speak, and they're using me to speak through. They're speaking through me onto this canvas or on this piece of paper or something like that. So yeah, energy, vibes, woo woo things. Thank you.
Well, maybe I would need a microphone too. Thank you so much for the wonderful talk.
Thank you.
I'm very inspired by this work. I have never made collage before, and I just have a kind of brief question to you. Like, so you said that you sometimes like use photos that you owned, right? That your aunt's in it or somebody is in it, that your loved family members, and I find myself, it's kind of hard to imagine myself cutting the photo because that photo itself is attachment. You have
Yeah.
some form of attachment to the photo and the scene that you remember. And I was wondering, understanding that story narrative is important to bring into the futuristic sort of like possible more literary like imagination. But at the same time, just wanted to hear your thoughts about that act of sort of cutting out something that specifically was in the place with a specific memory that you had, and to bring it to something else, to the potential future space.
Yeah.
How did you how do you process that feeling?
Yeah. I don't like cutting original photos, so I just make scans of them or like take a picture of it and then print it out that way because yeah, like physically speaking, especially because photos back then are so precious. And so I don't want to like cut out my aunt's picture from this photo that was taken like in the 30s or something like that. And so instead, I just take a scan of it and then cut it that way. Um, I have multiple copies of photos and stuff like that, and so cutting something out away from its like original context doesn't bother me too much because I can just pull up the photo again. But I doing this for like almost 10 years now, I have a very extensive like photo memory bank in my head. So I can look at a photo and still see the image and the imagery and environment that that photo was originally taken from. And so whenever I'm looking at it within the context of my own work, I'm like, yes, I told this new story, but I remember when I found this picture of this person sitting on this box, and now I got them sitting on a planet. How cool is that? You know. So that's kind of how I reconcile the separation in my head. Thank you.
I'm kind of piggybacking on that. When you started talking about your first collage, and you said you were using magazines and all, and I thought, there are fewer and fewer of those. I'm wondering where you're getting your raw materials.
Yeah.
And you mentioned archives, so could you talk a little more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I first got started, I was using magazines, and it was a lot of Essence Ebony magazines, National Geographic. They have really good paper, so I like using those magazines, and just whatever Southern Garden, Home and Garden magazines I could find. But as I got deeper into the practice, I noticed that magazine paper is a little more flimsy. Um, and so I sort of moved away from magazines, even though a lot of my work is published in magazines now, but I don't use them too much in my collage because I just don't like the way the paper feels. But the paper of like a Garden and Gun or National Geographic or something like that, I may use those. But a lot of the images that I find online, like through the archives, I'll just like print out on my home printer or get them like professionally printed if I want it on a specific type of paper. And I usually just go to Office Depot or something like that to use their paper. But I also source images from, because like I think most government most government images are public domain. So if you want to go on NASA or the National Park Services, they have like a very extensive digital collection. All of those images are free to use. Also Wikimedia Commons, unsplash.com. Like there's a lot of images. And then just I've collected photos and pictures and stuff and cutouts from like over the years, and it gets to a point where I have so many things cut out, I don't remember where everything comes from. But yeah, that's sort of where I've migrated sort of away from magazines into like other avenues. But for workshops and stuff, magazines are great. Yeah.
Is there a last question?
Thank you. First of all, I loved everything about this presentation. It was a joy to watch, and I do plan on being at the workshop tomorrow.
Hey now.
So hopefully I can make like my own little piece. I'm curious, interested in how you're choosing your backgrounds of your pieces. Because even though you were saying like, oh, it's not, if we look at it, we can't really see it. I definitely felt Afrofuturistic vibes just looking at the first piece that you had.
Ooh, so many. This one?
So many. No, not that one. It was I believe it was the Black Farmers one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Celestial Harvest?
Yes. Yeah, that one.
Yes.
And like just looking at that, I get Afrofuturistic vibes.
Yeah, I know.
Right? And when I look at all your backgrounds, they're so interesting. It's kind of like even though you're waiting for a muse, you're starting off already telling a story. And I wanted to see like how does that come about after you have your pieces and you're like, I want to do this. How then do you say I'm going to place them here?
Yeah. I kind of after I find like the orientation that I like, I started playing around with backgrounds and colors. And I'm like, okay, which colors feels good? You know, do I want like more of a muted background, like the one with my great aunt, or do I, want colors all up and through this piece? You know, and so there's no like one way that I go about creating the backgrounds for the work. I just kind of go with like what really feels good. So that's the main thing. Now, I will say with that, the piece with the water, I knew I wanted to make something that felt as if it was like the sun was going down, because I love the colors of sunsets. And all through middle school, I used to just do nothing but take sunset pictures. And so, like, I have like a whole photo album on one of my old laptops that has like thousands of pictures of sunsets on it. But I wanted there to be like a nice color contrast from all of the movement of the blue in the water. So some of it is really just like plugging and playing. It's almost like putting a puzzle piece together, but you don't know what the final outcome is going to be. You just know that once it's there, you're going to feel it. So that's kind of how I go about doing it. Okay. Thank you for your question.
All right, everyone. So please, first of all, before we share our speaker here, let me just remind you our next talk, which is our next event, November 6th at 5 p.m. in here, which is Lee Francis, who will be speaking on From Noble Savage to Tragic Chief, a brief history of natives and pop culture. So we're very excited for that. And in conclusion, thank you to Nancey Price.
Thank you.